Welcome back. There's one thing that we always take for granted. Week in, week out, we expect our teams to perform on the field. We just never conscious in terms of what happens off the field. I mean, some of us come from an era where boys don't cry, and we learn every day in terms of emotional intelligence. And we expect so much from our sporting teams. And so we decided to reach out and just find an expert in terms of how the world has changed with the COVID, the restriction, being in the bubble, what impact that has got on the players. Prof. Kobus Du Plooy spent lots of time down in Potchefstroom, now in New Zealand. Prof, thank you so much for your time. I think the big question for us is, how has this world changed and what impact does it have on everyday life, especially for our sports stars?
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to speak to you and to address the viewers. Yeah, I think we would all know that the world has changed significantly over the course of the last few years. So we all know that initially there was a huge focus on health and keeping people as safe as possible from a health point of view while the virus was being studied and getting better understood. But in the wake of all of this, there was also a significant impact in terms of people's mental health. So a lot of people really took a lot of strain during that time, and a lot of people are still taking a lot of strain, and that includes our sports stars as well. So I looked around at a bit of research just to sort of see what some of the latest findings are. There was a study recently in the Journal of Science and Sport. They actually showed that significant levels of stress, depression, anxiety, insomnia, denial, anger, fear, and aspects such as substance abuse, these are all aspects that we're seeing across the globe has increased significantly. So you can imagine, being a sports person as well, all the uncertainty that goes with being a professional athlete at present. You know, previously you knew what sort of was the schedule that's coming up. You sort of knew when you're going to play, where, and what happens. And nowadays, nothing is certain. So I think the uncertainty is also another layer that's been added that's really tough. So you don't know, for instance, will you have a positive COVID test? What impact will that have? And then also being in isolation, I think it's not healthy for us from a mental point of view. So it's really tough for everybody, but including athletes especially, who really need to perform at their best. They have, I think, this constant concern around that as well, because that's their livelihood, and we know how important that is. So yeah, it's had a massive impact on all of us.
Prof, Jonathan here. So obviously, the Springboks has been together since the 4th of May. However, the All Blacks, they only got together end of August. Is there a possibility, seeing them going through the same slump that we did the last 3-4 weeks when you're playing the Australians?
Yeah, without a doubt. That makes a lot of sense. In fact, I think there was actually some reluctance at one stage for them to travel to Australia out of concern of that as well for some of the test matches. So, yeah, without a doubt. If you're away from your family and your significant others for that long, and you basically can only have maybe Zoom calls or some online kind of contact, it's just not the same as being in person. So without a doubt, it will eventually start having an effect, and there can be some subtle fatigue that starts creeping in. And especially if a player is not really aware that this is having an effect, it can actually add more stress, because then they can start getting worried about that. So it sort of can have a snowball effect. Definitely.
Yeah, Prof. Robbie here. Just very importantly for everyone out there, if you're in charge of a team, what would be the markers or the indicators that you would give to your coaching staff, your team, your players, to ensure that they do manage the mental health aspect appropriately?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think different teams approach that in different ways. But I think first and foremost, I think having effective communication is very important. So in terms of getting the right information across to players, getting them to understand what it is that we sort of see in terms of like a fatigue setting in, and how that can start affecting you from a mental health point of view. Knowing some of the symptoms, if you start struggling, for instance, with insomnia, getting more irritable than you might ordinarily be, just finding that you're out of sorts, you just don't feel like yourself. And especially this is where you can ask, for instance, your roommate or someone who's close to you to sort of just be a support system and just sort of check in with each other. Because I think there can still be that sort of culture where we don't really check in with each other and just say, hey, look, how are you going? Is everything okay on your side? So that would be something important that I think all coaches can do. I think also having regular check-ins with players either one-on-ones or maybe in small groups, and just checking in terms of how are they going. And if you have a mental skills coach or psychologist or someone on board, to also include that person a lot. So to get that person to have group discussions, checking in with players individually. Because the sooner you speak up, the easier it is to address it.
It's a tough one to speak up. I mean, as we said, I mean, you expect the guys to say, for example, the Springbok team to be tough all the time. Now, from us, the fans, you know, when you say bio bubble, the first thing we think of is a resort, it's a hotel, guys have traveled before. What is the impact of a bio bubble for players? And what advice would you give a team, be it a school, that will go into a bio bubble preparing for a tournament? Because this looks like it's going to be the norm going forward if you want school sports to get back into the action and to see more provincial tournaments and competition taking place.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think some teams tend to, it will also depend a lot on the culture and the team dynamic that's already existing in the team. So I think I'd also do a lot of work on that before going into a bubble. Make sure how are things actually in terms of the relationships between players and the dynamics in that space. Because that's obviously something that you're going to take into that space, and being closely interacting with each other, and mostly only with each other for an extended period of time. So I think that would be the one thing I'd address, try and look at that beforehand. But going into the bubble itself, I would also try and build on some of the things I've already mentioned, having regular meetings, checking in often, but also making sure that there's enough contact as frequently as possible with family and significant others at home. And also, if possible, to have some kind of a mechanism where players can know that should something happen to a family member or someone that they cannot reach immediately, that there is also some support system available for them. So I think putting that in place can also help a player to be at ease. But going into that kind of space, I think it's also about having some patience and tolerance with each other, because everyone's not always going to be, you know, at their best. We're human. So sometimes you're just not going to feel great, and you're going to have an off day. But having that team environment where you feel you belong and you feel that it's okay to address it with maybe a roommate or someone that can have a big impact, as opposed to leaving it and sort of unaddressed, or let's say not speaking out about it. I think that's, as soon as you start isolating yourself with something, that's sort of, I think, one of the major risk factors of going into a bubble, because it's already quite a tough environment to be in. It's already stressful. So I think having frequent communication and check-ins is going to be vital.
Prof, thank you so much for the insights. I mean, we want to keep in touch with you going forward. You got a great smile. Please tell us, what was it like in the last couple of hours down in New Zealand? A great victory. If you've got a message for any of your friends out here in South Africa, please send it. I know we're approaching the festive season. Please feel free.
Yeah. Thank you. It was a great experience. The game was played actually quite late here yesterday. At one stage, I was cheering so hard, my wife was telling me I should maybe just settle down a bit, because the neighbors might not know that I'm watching the game. But yeah, it was a really excellent just experience. And yeah, I think everybody here, especially all the South African friends that I have here, they were all just very happy. And suddenly a lot of the New Zealand friends I have here were quite quiet in some of our chat rooms. So it was great. But yeah, to all family and friends in South Africa, yeah, I will love and stay safe, and we look forward to seeing each other again soon.